Some people reach the end of their lives still steering, and some spend their final years waiting for someone to come and take the wheel. That difference was never about fortune. I am 83 years old. My name is Winifred. When my husband Clarence died, everyone around me seemed to have an opinion about what I should do next. Move somewhere smaller. Go live closer to your grandchildren. A woman at your stage in life simply cannot manage a household on her own. And yet, here I am. Not because anyone came to rescue me, not because life decided to extend me some courtesy. I am still standing because many decades ago, I quietly began building the only 5 things that actually hold a person upright when every other support has given way. No one told me to do this. Nobody sat me down and explained it plainly. If you want to keep your freedom, if you want to remain yourself, here is exactly what you need to construct. I had to teach myself by watching the people around me either drift slowly into dependency or hold their own ground until the very last day. The first thing is your physical capacity to keep moving. Not athletics, not gym routines or training schedules. Simply moving. With purpose, without interruption, every day. I understood this clearly when I was 69. I woke up on an ordinary Wednesday morning and could not rise from the bed without gripping the headboard with both hands. My knees felt like they had rusted shut overnight. My lower back had stiffened into something that barely resembled a working spine. I sat there on the edge of the mattress, breathing through it, and thought, this is the beginning of something I do not want. And then I thought of a woman named Agatha who had lived across the street from me. She was 65 when her joints began failing her. She did not pay it much attention at first. She simply sat down more than she used to, took things more slowly, avoided the stairs when she could. But sitting became her whole world. Within 2 years, she had moved into her daughter's spare bedroom. She hadn't lost her mind. Her memory was perfectly intact. What she had lost was her mobility, and with it, every meaningful choice available to her. When you can no longer move your own body reliably through space, you can no longer move your own life. That Wednesday morning on the edge of my mattress, I made a decision. I would move every single day from that point forward, regardless of what was happening. I started with nothing ambitious. A slow walk around the block before lunch. Careful rotations of the ankles and wrists after dinner. Gentle knee lifts while sitting at the table in the morning. No performance, no audience. Just the persistent refusal to let stillness take over. Because I understood what was truly being protected. Today, at 83, I dress myself without assistance. I walk to the corner market on my own. I carry my own things home. That means I never have to schedule my life around someone else's availability. I never have to ask for permission to go anywhere. My friend Elspeth stopped moving at 71, convinced that conserving energy was the same thing as wisdom. But conservation became collapse. Today she requires help to get to her front door, and she cannot leave or enter her own home without someone standing beside her. Her confinement has no walls. It is constructed entirely from the inactivity she chose over the years. Do not let that happen to you. Your body is the foundation beneath every other freedom you possess. Treat it as what it is. The second thing is learning to need less. Not as deprivation, not as hardship, as a deliberate strategy. For most of my adult life, I believed that security was something you built by accumulating. More savings, more property, more comfort layered around you. I thought that surrounding myself with more would protect me from the vulnerability of getting older. I was entirely mistaken. Real security is not about how much you hold. It is about how little you require to function. I came to understand this at 66, roughly 2 years after Clarence died. I was at the kitchen table late one evening, going through the monthly costs of a house with 3 floors, a large yard that demanded constant upkeep, and more rooms than I could use in a month. And I asked myself a hard, quiet question. Who exactly is all of this for? I thought of a man named Eldridge who lived a few streets over, who had worked his entire career without ever touching his retirement accounts, who had constructed a life that looked prosperous from the outside and was silently eating him alive from within. By the time he reached his late 70s, his fixed expenses had outpaced everything coming in. His pension could not keep pace. He began borrowing from his youngest son, discreetly at first, then regularly, then desperately. I watched him lose something in himself each time he had to make that call. I sold the house. I moved into a single-story place I owned outright, with low maintenance costs and manageable heating bills. I sold the second car. I stopped eating out 6 nights a week out of habit. I stopped acquiring things simply because I had grown comfortable with the ritual of acquiring things. And something I had not anticipated happened. I felt more prosperous, not because my balances had grown, but because my obligations had shrunk. When you do not require much, no one holds leverage over you. You are not indebted to anyone for financial rescue. You do not have to soften what you say or bite your tongue to preserve a relationship with someone who helps you pay your bills. I have a dear friend named Millicent, who is 80 years old and still maintaining a house with 5 bedrooms that she cannot afford to keep up. She refuses to downsize because of what she imagines others will think. So she scrapes. She accepts money from her children and tells herself it costs her nothing. On paper, she owns far more than I do. In practice, she is far less free. The third thing is your health. Not the health you were given at birth, but the health you build through the habits you keep. I want to say this directly because I have watched too many people my age suffer consequences that were entirely within their power to prevent. Your body stops negotiating at a certain point. You either tend to it or it begins calling in decades of debt. My younger brother Franklin ignored every signal his body sent him for 30 years. He ate whatever was easiest and required the least thought. He smoked well into his early 60s. He only visited a physician when something had already gone visibly wrong. At 70, the accounting arrived. Advanced type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and blood pressure requiring multiple medications just to keep him out of immediate crisis. He did not die, but in most of the ways that matter, he stopped living. He became a full-time manager of his own medical deterioration, tracking prescriptions, attending specialist appointments several days a week, planning every single meal around a list of restrictions that seemed to grow longer every year. That was what the remainder of his life looked like, administering the consequences of 30 years of indifference. I took a different path. At 64, I changed the conditions I was operating under. I began walking every morning before breakfast, regardless of weather. I started preparing real food from real ingredients instead of whatever required the least effort. I drank water. I slept at consistent hours, and I went to my doctor every year without waiting to feel sick, because I understood that prevention and treatment are entirely different activities, and that identifying a problem early is the difference between a minor course correction and a years-long ordeal. Today, at 83, I take no daily medications. My blood markers are good. My physician tells me my body functions closer to that of a woman in her late 60s. I am not exceptional. I am not unusually fortunate in my genetics. I simply made consistent, modest decisions over a long stretch of time, and those decisions accumulated. The freedom I have now to manage my own health, to not need a caretaker to remind me to take pills or drive me to appointments, is the direct return on that investment. Earn your health every day, or spend your final years paying the interest on neglect. The fourth thing is the capacity to survive loss without being destroyed by it. This is the one nobody wants to sit with. But after the age of 60, loss stops being an occasional visitor and becomes something closer to a permanent resident. The people you have organized your life around will begin to leave, through death, through distance, through the slow erosion that time applies to everything. The question that will define your remaining decades is not whether you will face loss that takes the ground out from under you. You will. The question is whether you can keep moving forward after it happens, without requiring other people to carry the weight of your grief for you. When Clarence died, I was 64. We had been together for 39 years. In the weeks after, I felt as though something structural inside me had simply been removed. I could see the two roads plainly. I could dissolve. I could allow the grief to become my entire identity. Sit near the telephone, waiting for my children to call. Build my days entirely around the question of who would come next to fill the quiet. Or I could grieve, genuinely, completely, without apology. and still choose to keep walking. I chose to keep walking. I cried when I needed to cry. I spoke about him openly, to myself and to the people who had loved him. But I did not make my emptiness into someone else's burden. I kept my routines. I kept showing up to the ordinary things. And gradually, carefully, I built something new around the space he had left. Not better, not the same, only different. A friend of mine named Theodosia lost her husband around that same period. She withdrew from everything she had previously loved. She stopped returning calls. She entered a kind of suspended state, as though she were holding her breath, waiting for someone to come and restore what had been taken from her. Her children tried everything. They visited constantly. They called every evening, but they could not repair it, because grief does not get resolved by other people's presence. It gets metabolized by your own willingness to keep moving through it, day after day. Theodosia is now 78 and still suspended, still waiting, quietly furious that no one has managed to make her whole again. I loved Clarence completely, but I never believed that my survival was his children's obligation. Resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the willingness to stand back up after the pain has put you on the floor, and then to do it again the next time, and the time after that. Without that willingness, you will spend the rest of your life dependent on other people to lift you. The fifth thing is a clear, unshakable knowledge of who you are, and an absolute refusal to surrender it. This is possibly the least visible danger in aging, because it does not arrive loudly. It comes quietly, wearing the costume of care. After a certain age, the people who love you most will begin making decisions on your behalf, carefully at first, then with growing confidence. Your grown children will decide what is safe. Your doctors will discuss you as if you were a body in a chair, rather than a person with a point of view. Society will quietly lower what it expects of you, without announcing that it has done so. And if you are not deeply certain of who you are, and what you need, and what you will absolutely not accept, you will drift along with it. I watched this happen to a woman named Cordelia. 71 years old, sharp as a blade, entirely capable. Her family started by insisting she give up her car keys. Then they persuaded her to relocate to a nearby town to be closer to them. Then they began steering her away from activities they considered too physically demanding. By 79, Cordelia was living a life designed entirely around her family's anxieties rather than her own interests. She had been gently managed into a smaller existence, one reasonable-sounding restriction at a time, and the bitterness of it was quietly hollowing her out. When my daughter suggested I might want to consider a supervised living arrangement, just as a precaution, just to be practical, I declined. Not with hostility, not with theater. I said, I understand your concern, and I know it comes from a place of love. But while I am fully capable of running my own life, that is exactly what I intend to do. If something changes, we will have that conversation when it arrives. but it has not arrived yet. She pushed. She came at me through worry and through guilt. She tried several different approaches over several different weeks. But I knew exactly who I was and what I was not prepared to give away. I am now 83, living in my own home, making my own choices, eating what I choose to eat, and sleeping when I choose to sleep, and spending my days according to my own sense of what matters. Not from stubbornness, from self-knowledge. If you do not know yourself clearly, your values, the things you would rather fight for than hand over, the lines you will not allow to be crossed, other people will occupy that space with their own preferences, and you will spend whatever years remain living out someone else's version of who you should be. There they are then, the 5 things. Your physical mobility, the capacity to need less, your health tended every day, your resilience when loss arrives, and your knowledge of yourself held firmly. Nobody can build these for you. Nobody can preserve them on your behalf. Your family can love you without limit, and that love will not be sufficient on its own, not without these 5 things underneath it. And if you are 58 or 67 or even 75, it is not too late to begin building them. But you cannot wait. Start moving your body today, not next week. Start reducing what you depend on. Start treating your health as a daily practice rather than an emergency response. Start sitting with your own pain instead of handing it to someone else. Start knowing what you stand for. I can tell you with complete certainty that in 15 years you will not regret the discipline. The only thing you will ever regret is the waiting. If something I said reached you, leave me a comment below. I read every one, and they matter more than you might imagine. And if you want to stay with this conversation a little longer, there's another video ready for you right now about the 4 things nobody tells you before you spend a year living truly alone. The uncomfortable lessons I had to learn without a guide, and how I came through them without losing myself. Click it now. And if you want to keep coming back, subscribe. I will be here.